Hello guys, it's Unders, and in this video we're going to have a look at how you can make your mix wider.
I'm Jaws on the beat, I got a flow that kills. Do my ting with a few G's, Lauren Hill.
And someone asked essentially how do you make your whole mix like nice and wide? And I thought we should really break down into that. So like the first thing we're going to look at is the mix itself and the track itself, and does it deserve to be an entirely wide mix? Then going to look at like the panning and whether or not panning is going to play a part in how you do this. Then we're going to have a look at effects and different effect types you can use to create the width effect, and should you use them on the master bus or on individual tracks, or should you just have them on one effect to try and make that thing feel wide? So if you want to do the whole track feeling wide, the tendency and feeling is to put it on the master and kind of spread it out, but it causes more problems than it's going to ever resolve in you getting a nice feeling out of it. So let's jump into Logic. We're going to use a track of mine that's a work in progress, but hopefully it's going to get all of the ideas across for you and we can learn a little something from it. So let's move into the video.
Thanks to the channel sponsor DistroKid. DistroKid is a music distribution service and the best way to get your music out to all of the modern streaming services fast, efficiently, and within an independent artist's budget. Check out the description below for a discount today. Timing. If a track is always very wide and very spread out, you simply don't get that feeling of like wideness and sudden expansion, right? It needs to happen. It needs to be an instance that causes the attention to that wideness, that immersion to happen. So the example I'm going to show you here is I've got lots of different vocal layers, and in different areas they're panned in different ways and they don't always occur. So you should suddenly get the perspective of like a big wide spread. So hopefully you can hear there that the vocals in certain sections are really spread out and immersed, and yet the smaller sections are actually quite mono. Like this little chunk just here is actually pretty narrow. But when you take this section here, it's really spread out. Okay, and the reason it feels so more spread out is because it's juxtaposed with something that's a little bit more narrow. So you've got to have that timing aspect. You can't just mix the whole thing to be as wide as possible. You simply become used to it. The first aspect you've got to look at, it's got to be written and designed and mixed to have moments where it spreads out. If it's just always spread, then there's no change. There's nothing big about that. So let's dive into the second point. The second point is panning. Panning is one of your easiest tools to work between the left and right. And quite simply, if we have two different bits of audio and we pan them to different sides, it feels wide.
Caught in your trap, baby.
So if we were to have this just dead center on its own,
Caught in your trap, baby.
however, we've got it 30% either way.
Caught in your trap, baby.
Now that only works because it's the same thing recorded twice. If we were to make a copy of this layer here and just pan it the opposite way, we wouldn't get anything special. In fact, we'd get that mono signal again.
Caught in your trap, baby.
So it has to be the same thing but slightly panned. That gives the trick on the brain of getting two different things to each ear. It must be the same source but really, really wide. So in context of the track, got something like this.
I never thought that I would be caught in your trap, baby.
Okay, so there we've got two bits going. It's nice and mono, and then the key aspect is really panned out nice and wide. So let's listen to that again. It's kind of not necessarily mono, it's still a stereo track, but we don't go extra wide until that final aspect, and that's where the attention comes in.
I never thought that I would be caught in your trap, baby.
Right, Now, there's lots of different ways that you can pan your tracks out. Some people prefer the hard pan method. Either you pan all the way to the left, all the way to the right, or leave it dead center. I quite like to balance things and put them in a stereo space. Either way can work, and you can do different kinds of balancing depending on your track. For example, with sections here, we've actually got some really hard panned parts. Yeah, so I've got lots of effects going on. I've got some center sections, but I've also got this bit. She's the devil for you. She's the devil for you. Yeah, and they're panned so hard left and right that they almost sit back if you're wearing headphones. And then the others do the upfront work. Right, and that just does that little bit of flair and extra wideness before it drops into the next part. The last thing we can do is use effects to create that sense of wideness in a track. So if we've mixed everything, we've got a nice stereo field. We've mixed it so that we've just got key moments of big, wide stereo-ness going on, wide feeling. Then we can use effects to build on that. Now, generally, I wouldn't do these on the master track, and that's because you're going to come across all kinds of phasing issues. So what we'll do, we'll take this section of the track, but we'll mute the vocal sections in it. Just got the instruments that are going in the drop here. Now, it's still wide, but it's not ultra wide. If you were to just drop an effect on the master bus that would make something wide, for example, we could use Waves S1. And the S1's quite good at keeping things in mono compatibility, but if we push the width right out, it'll feel super wide. But we get all sorts of weird issues in the balance of the track and the tonality of it. Now, if we go test this for mono compatibility and it happens to be okay, then we could get away with it, but we're going to have to rebalance the track, and by having this ultra push to the sides all the time, those moments where we've used that to an effect are going to be lost in translation. So if we were to switch on the gain plugin here, and we'll leave mono on, if we can still hear all the elements. Okay, so when we enable S1 and we've got mono switched on, because we're checking for mono compatibility, the volume drops by a few dB, and that's not ideal. That means there's definitely some phase cancellation going on. We can still hear all of the elements, but we'd certainly be losing some. There's still no reason we couldn't just have a play around with the width control and maybe push it just a little bit on our master, but not be too extreme with it. But we do always need to test it for things like this. This is probably the laziest way to do it, and you might find some mastering engineers do an element of this if you've got a particularly narrow mix. Now, if you've already got a narrow mono compatible mix, this might work for you, but it does depend. Again, we've got that volume jump when we take the S1 off. So it's not going to work well in this instance on the master track, but we can apply effects like this to elements of the track. But something like S1 is a really simple way to have that effect. Okay, so something else that I use is an invention of mine, essentially, is called the wide aux. I feed different parts of the project into that, but if we take just this bass line, for example, it's very gritty and mono. However, listen to when I feed it into my wide aux. So you're now completely immersed. However, we're going back to that mono compatibility thing. If we have that engaged right now, we lose absolutely none of the bass, even though it's this huge stereo sound. So let me just show you how that works. Basically, I'm sending the bass tone to an auxiliary track, and on that track, there's a couple of things. Again, we're using an effect. So here we've got the Real ADT plugin, and that is just making basically a stereo copy of the bass as it comes in, like this. So we've got some spread and width already. Now the magic starts to really happen on the next one here. If you need to learn about the Real ADT, it's in that vocal video I spoke about earlier. It's the third plugin, so it's about 20 minutes into the video. This then goes into an EQ, and now this EQ is working in mid-side mode, and the mids are reduced by 30 dB, so they're almost completely taken out of the mix. So when we enable that, we end up with this. So you've now got that ripping bass still in the mids, and the sides are just being affected, and I've done a slightly lift at different frequencies on the sides. Okay, so that sounds good, that works and gives us a stereo bass that's mono compatible. We'll take it a step further, we feed it into a reverb. The reverb makes it sound like this. So it's now got its own space, but the middle is still completely dry and raw. Again, leaving it mono compatible, and it means now that when we throw it into stereo, the sides are different enough that they don't cancel each other out. The last thing we do is just a bit of control over the drums with some sidechain compression. Really, really simple. So that gives us this effect. And that helps the mix in general, and things that would usually be really mono-focused still be really mono-focused in the mix overall. It'd be like this. But when they are in stereo, they can feel huge. And that, guys, is my 3 ways to get yourselves having a super wide mix. I hope it was helpful for you. If you have any questions about the plugins and process inside of it, let me know. I'll do another video following it up. Thank you very much for watching and subscribing. I'll see you guys on the next one.
Keep it real, I'm independent, I don't need no deal. I'm jaws on the beat, I got a flow that kills. Do my thing with a few G's, Lauryn Hill.